Welcome, foolish mortals, to another episode of a Dark Cup of Histortea. Although this is one of those episodes that could possibly have been included in our regular main historical podcast.
As a sideline to our main podcast, A Nice Cup of Histortea, we've decided that every third podcast would be darker and spookier to indulge in our other interest in the paranormal, mysterious side of life. We promise we aren't completely insane.
Well, no.
Just mostly.
Yeah, everyone's a little bit bonkers.
Exactly.
This week we are in the 1600s, when it was all the craze to blame seemingly harmless women of witchcraft whenever anything, and we mean anything, bad was to befall you.
Yeah. You stub your toe in the night, witch.
Yep, you bite into an apple and it's gone off a little bit, witch.
It rains a little bit too much in the middle of England in October, witch. Yep.
There's a random heat wave for 1 week in May in England, witch.
Mainly conducted in Europe, witch trials did begin to gain momentum all across the globe. And today we're going to be delving into the sordid past of possibly the most infamous of all the witch trials, the Salem Witch Trials.
And in our ridiculous death, we find out who was responsible for the apparently well-known phrase, died for want of lobster sauce.
Never heard of it.
Well, you'll find out why it should be used. I feel like we shall use it.
Okay.
Specifically, possibly for a friend of ours, not naming any names, Matt Farmer, but he doesn't listen, so that's fine.
This is going to be the one he listens to. So, hide those cauldrons, stop that hex, grab a witch's brew, and let's get historical. So, before we delve deeper into the who's, what's, where's, why's, wherefores of the Salem Witch Trials, we're going to give you a very brief background.
Yeah, there were two Salems in the late 17th century, a bustling commerce-orientated port community on Massachusetts Bay known as Salem Town, which would evolve into modern-day Salem. And roughly 10 miles, or 16 kilometres, inland from that, there was a smaller, poorer farming community with only some 500 peoples. This was known as Salem Village.
Salem being short for Jerusalem.
Yes.
Yeah. The village itself had a noticeable social divide that was exacerbated by a rivalry between its two leading families. The well-heeled Porters, who had strong connections with Salem Town's wealthy merchants, and the Putnams, who sought greater autonomy for the village and were the standard bearers for the less prosperous farm families. Squabbles over property were commonplace, and litigiousness, or going to court and just basically arguing over land disputes, legal disputes, everything, that was rampant. That was really, really common.
So technically the Putnams were, I guess you could say, for the poor, and the Porters were for the rich.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
At this point. Ignoring the witch trials, just in general.
Yeah. So, Porters, upper class, Putnams for the common man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Porters were conservative, Putnams were Labour, as it were.
Yeah.
To bring it into modern day politics.
So, what were the Salem Witch Trials?
They were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts. And this was only for a very short period of time, from February 1692 until May 1693.
So, 13 months.
Yeah. All of this, what we're going to talk about, happened in just 13 months. Which I guess is why it's quite important and why we talk about it so much. Because yes, the witch trials had gone on in Europe for a long time before that. Like, I think the first person to be accused of witch and killed was in like 1640s, but that was around England, and the Witchfinder General, which we'll talk about in another time. But yeah, so everything we're going to talk about happened just in 13 months, which I think is why it's such a big deal, because so much happened in such a very short amount of time.
And notice when we refer to the victims that we say people, not women.
Yep.
Because it wasn't just women.
No, and like I said, that the earliest recorded witchcraft execution was that of someone called Elsie Young, and this was in Hartford, Connecticut. So I was wrong; it wasn't England. This was the first recorded one.
There were ones in England and Europe much earlier, but they were kind of,
in America, and that was in 1647, and it was the start of the Connecticut witch trials, which lasted until 1663.
So they lasted longer. They lasted 16 years. I want to say 16.
Yeah, that's quick maths. Well done.
She wasn't being patronising, by the way. I have numerical dyslexia.
But Carrie's not good with the maths. She's better with the words, as you've known through these podcasts.
Yeah, I don't do maths. Normally that would take me about 5 minutes to work out. And
no word. She word, no math.
Yeah.
That's why we work.
Yes. Balance.
Yeah.
Yin and yang. Math and English. Maths. There's an S on the end. We're English. That hurt. Sorry.
Anyway.
So, more than 200 people were accused. 30 were actually found guilty. 19 of those were executed by hanging.
And this is the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah, this is the Salem Witch Trials. Executed by hanging, not by burning. The majority, even in the European witch trials, the majority of the witches were actually hung rather than burned.
Yeah.
It just seems that burning is a stereotype now. So in total, 30 people, 19 executed, which were 14 women and 5 men. Mm-hmm. One other man, Giles Corey,
who we will talk about later on in more detail,
was pressed to death for refusing to plead, which we'll come back to what that means later, and at least 5 other people died in jail.
So in those 13 months, 200 people were accused.
Yeah.
Like we said, only 30 were found guilty, so 170 got off. 19 died, but 200 people in those 13 months. That's almost... That's like 3 a week.
Yeah.
3 or 4 a week in this tiny little place.
Yeah, basically.
And considering Salem Village only had 500 people in it max, 200 people were accused.
That's the majority of the village. That's
cray.
I mean...
That's almost half.
This is probably one of those ones where we will inject a little bit of our personal opinion into it.
Yeah, we don't tend to do that.
No, we tend to try and be objective, as historians should be. But with things like this, it's hysteria and stupidity and bigotry that just kind of exploded.
Yeah. Arrests were made in numerous towns beyond Salem and Salem Village, but Salem Village is nowadays known as Danvers in America. And it was particularly in Andover and Topsfield.
Yeah, so if you live in any of those places, probably some of your ancestors were caught up in this.
Yeah, probably.
So.
Yeah.
The grand juries and trials for this capital crime, meaning a crime punishable by death, in 1692 were conducted by a court of oia, or to hear, like, or to hear, something's Latin, possibly, and a court of termina to decide. This is just fancy law term, which means a high criminal court in some US states, basically.
In 1693, they were conducted by a superior court of...
Judicature.
Yeah, sorry, I just had some Coke and I thought I was going to...
You thought you were going to hiccup?
Yeah, but I'm good. Both of these were held in Salem town, where the hangings also took place.
Yeah. It has the somewhat dubious reputation of being the deadliest witch hunt in the history of colonial North America. Only 14 other women and 2 men had been executed in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 17th century.
Yeah, that's not of witchcraft. That's just only 14 people were hung for crimes.
Yeah, in general.
And we've just heard 19 were in just those 13 months.
So that's crimes like theft, murder, sabotage, arson, rape, things like that.
Yeah.
All of those serious crimes. And they had a lower body count than witches.
Yeah.
The episode is one of colonial America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. It has been used in political rhetoric and popular literature as a vivid cautionary tale about the dangers of isolationism, religious extremism, false accusations, and lapses in due process.
Yeah, it was not unique, but a colonial American example of much broader phenomenon of witch trials in the early modern period, which took place also in Europe. Many historians consider the lasting effects of the trials to have been highly influential in subsequent United States history. According to an historian known as George Lincoln Burr, he said that the Salem witchcraft was the rock on which the theocracy was shattered.
That would make sense, because theocracy being religion ruling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if religion had failed them to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
George Lincoln Burr? Any relation to Aaron Burr? Sir. Sorry, I couldn't resist. We'll have to look into that.
Yeah. I thought I recognised the name when I was researching into this.
If you know, Ping
Let
us? Yeah, let us know. I mean, we'll Google it as well, but if you know, you get props for knowing. Yeah. At the 300th anniversary events in 1992, to commemorate the victims of the trials, a park was dedicated in Salem and a memorial in Danvers. In 1957, an act was passed by the Massachusetts legislature absolving 6 people, whilst another one passed in 2001 absolved 5 other victims. But that's not all of them. So some of them are still accused. As of 2004, there was still talk about exonerating all of the victims, though something that happened in the 19th century as the Massachusetts colonial legislature was asked to reverse the attainders of George Burroughs and others. So, it could have been done, might not have been done.
Yeah.
We don't know. In January 2016, the University of Virginia announced its Gallows Hill Project team had determined the execution site in Salem where the 19 witches, in inverted commas, had been hanged, and the city dedicated the Proctor's Ledge Memorial to the victims there in 2017.
So it is still something that is having effects.
Yeah. And hold on to the name Proctor.
Yes. So that's kind of like a brief
overview, a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah.
Flyby.
Just kind of, we're going to go into a bit deeper now. Yeah. So, while witch trials had begun to fade out across Europe by the mid-17th century...
The Age of Enlightenment.
Yes. They continued on the fringes of Europe, however, and in American colonies. The events of 1692, 1693 in Salem, Massachusetts became a sort of brief outburst of a sort of hysteria in the New World, where the practice was already waning in most of Europe. Now, we say the New World because obviously this was created by some English people that came over to America and founded what they called the New World. So if it was happening in England, they just brought what they thought in England over to America.
Yeah. And a lot of them were Puritans, so they had a very strict religious view.
Yep.
Yeah, they interpreted the Bible virtually to the letter.
Yep.
In the 1668 book entitled Against Modern Sadducism, Joseph Glanville claimed that he could prove the existence of witches and ghosts of the supernatural realm. It's quite a big claim to make.
Yeah, it's a bit, isn't it?
He wrote about the denial of the bodily resurrection and the supernatural spirits. So, your religions were like all about the body resurrecting or the soul resurrecting after death, and he was like, people are denying this. Blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He also claimed that ingenious men should believe in witches and apparitions. So basically saying if you're clever, you should believe in them. He said, and I quote, "If they doubted the reality of spirits, they not only denied demons, but also the Almighty God." Yeesh.
It's pretty hardcore, isn't it?
Yeah. His aim was to prove that the supernatural couldn't be denied. Those who did deny apparitions were considered heretics because it also potentially disproved their belief in angels.
He was basically saying you either believe in everything or you believe in nothing.
Yeah, it's basically if you don't believe in spirits, then how do you believe that angels can be?
That kind of makes sense.
Well, yeah, you have to have a certain element of belief because angels are a form of spirit, and you have the Holy Spirit. So you have to believe in him somehow. He worked, and there was another guy called Cotton Mather. They were writing to basically try and prove that demons were alive. Unfortunately, this argument didn't really help with any hysteria that was already ongoing in the American colonies at the time. This basically was fuel to the fire.
Yeah, definitely. You got these two people that are quite known. They're quite clever. They're scholars.
They're respected.
And they're writing to say that if you're clever too, you'll believe in this stuff.
Yep.
And no one's going to want to be like, hey, I'm stupid.
Whereas nowadays, it's like, if you're clever, you won't believe in this stuff. How the turns have tabled.
But you got it wrong then. I was like, what? And then you said, I enjoy that.
You're welcome.
Right, before we go into, we're going to get onto Salem, but we think we should give you some political context first. So, as we said, that New England had been settled by religious dissenters seeking to build a Bible-based society according to their own chosen discipline. The original 1629 Royal Charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was vacated in 1684, after which King James II installed Sir Edmund Andros as the governor of the Dominion of New England.
Just as a wee bit of background, like we've talked before about the whole ding dong between back and forth between Catholicism and Protestantism, and yeah, so this was a time when England and actually most of Northern and Western Europe was kind of half was Catholic, half was Protestant, and some kind of in between. And yeah, we were pinging back and forth, and this group of people didn't believe that no matter what we did, Catholic or Protestant, England was not going hard enough.
No.
So it was go hard or go to the New World.
Yep.
Which they did.
Andros was ousted in 1689 after the, and I quote, glorious revolution in England that replaced the Catholic James II with the Protestant co-rulers William and Mary.
Yep, so ping back again.
Yep. Simon Bradstreet and Thomas Danforth were the colony's last leaders under the old charter. They resumed their posts as governor and deputy governor, but they lacked constitutional authority to rule because the old charter had been vacated.
Yeah, so basically they had the position, but they didn't have any power.
Yep.
It had all been removed. A new charter for what was now the larger province of Massachusetts Bay was given final approval by England on the 16th of October 1691. Increase Mather, they got really weird names.
Puritans.
Yeah, true. Increase Mather had been working on obtaining the charter for 4 years, with William Phipps often joining him in London and helping him to gain entry to Whitehall. Increase Mather had published a book on witchcraft in 1684, and his son Cotton Mather published one in 1689. Increase Mather brought out a London edition of his son's book in 1690. Bit of paternal support there. Mm-hmm. Increase Mather claimed to have picked all the men to be included in the new government.
Yep, and news of Mather's charter and the appointment of Phipps as the new governor had reached Boston by late January, and a copy of the new charter reached it by February the 8th, 1692. So we're now at the beginning of the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
Phipps arrived in Boston on May 14th and was sworn in as governor just 2 days later, along with Lieutenant Governor William Sorton. One of the first orders of business for the new governor and council on May 27th, 1692, was the formal nomination of county justices of the peace, sheriffs, and the commission of a special court of Oa and Termina to handle the large numbers of people who were thronging the jails.
So basically, first order of business, sort out what's going on with the jails. We've got too many people in the jails. We need to have these trials of all Oya and Termina. We need to get things sorted, and should they be there, should they not?
Yep.
Basically. So, let's give you... That's the political context. So what about the local context?
Yes. So Salem itself.
Yeah. So Salem Village was known for its fractious population. They had many internal disputes, and for disputes between the village and Salem town, mostly about property lines, grazing rights, and church privileges, the neighbouring town considered the population as quarrelsome. So they were constantly at each other.
Yeah. Salem town thought Salem Village had too many peoples.
Yeah, and Salem Village thought Salem town
had too much stuff.
Yeah.
Basically,
yeah.
In a nutshell.
Pretty much. Yeah.
In 1672, the villagers had voted to hire a minister of their own apart from Salem town. The two ministers that were first chosen were James Bailey from 1673 to 79 and George Burroughs from 1680 to 83. They only stayed a few years each, departing after the congregation failed to pay their full rate.
So they hired them but didn't pay them properly.
Yep. And Burroughs, however, was subsequently arrested at the height of the witchcraft hysteria and was hanged as a witch in August 1692.
That came back to bite him.
Didn't it just?
Despite the minister's rights being upheld by the General Court and the parish being reprimanded because they didn't pay them properly, each of the two ministers still made that choice to leave. The third minister, Deodat Lawson, 1684 to 1688, stayed for a short time, leaving after the church in Salem refused to ordain him. So first they didn't pay them, then they didn't ordain them.
Yep. The parish disagreed about Salem Village's choice of Samuel Parris as the first ordained minister. Remember that name. On June 18th, 1869, the villagers agreed to hire Parris for £66 a year.
That was a lot back then.
Yeah, it was. I don't know what that equates into obviously dollars, and then into You have a look.
Yeah.
Which was 1/3 part in money and the other 2/3 parts in provisions and the use of the personage. So basically he'd be paid this. So 1/3, what's a third of £66? 22.
Yep.
So in £22 he'd be given as money, and then £44 he'd be given in other things, provisions, so food, drink, housing, blah 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 blah, all that sort of stuff. On October the 10th in 1689, however, they raised his benefits, voting to grant him the deed of personage and 2 acres of land. This conflicted with a 1681 village resolution, which stated that, and I quote, "It shall not be lawful for the inhabitants of the village to convey the houses or lands or any other concerns belonging to the ministry or to any particular person or persons, not for any cause by votes or other ways." So basically, in 1681, they had a piece of law, a bit of legislation to say that people will not be given lands for the sake of being given lands. There has to be a reason, blah, blah, blah. But then, in just 8 years later, they've just decided that this Samuel Paris deserves lands. Just gave them to him. No vote, no nothing. They just gave him lands. Have you got how much?
I can't convert it all the way back to 1689. However, from 1750, so about 50, 60 years later, £66 was worth today £15,011.
Wow.
So it was like, say about £18,000, which is probably about $20,000.
Yeah. Which for back then is a ridiculous amount of money.
Yes.
Because things didn't cost much.
No.
So the prior minister's fates and the level of contention in Salem village were valid reasons for caution in accepting this position. Because obviously they wouldn't ordain the other ones, they didn't give the other ones money, but they're throwing everything at Samuel Paris.
Yeah.
So Reverend Paris then increased the village's divisions by delaying his acceptance.
They were probably busy blaming each other, like, you wouldn't ordain the last one, well, you wouldn't pay the last one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He did not seem able to settle his new parishioners' disputes by deliberately seeking out inquisitorious behaviour in his congregation and making church members in good standing suffer public penance for small infractions. He contributed significantly to the tension within the village, and its bickerings increased.
So, by saying, like, members of good standing suffer public penance, so he's basically saying that if you did something really, really small, so say you spoke out of turn in mass, or like one of the common ones was a woman was seen chiding her husband in public and things, you would be publicly humiliated for it. So I can see that would not make him a very popular person.
No.
So whilst we're talking about ministers, I think it'd be important, especially considering, you know, witches and devils and blah blah blah, to look at the religious context.
Yeah, this is the big one. This is what it all really came down to.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it was political and it was personal and everything, but they blamed it on the religious.
Yes.
So, prior to the constitutional turmoil of the 1680s, the Massachusetts government had been dominated by conservative Puritan secular leaders. Whilst Puritans and the Church of England both shared a common influence in Calvinism, Puritans had opposed many of the traditions of the Church of England, including the use of the Book of Common Prayer, the use of clergy vestments during services, the use of the sign of cross at baptism, and kneeling to receive communion, and pretty much anything fun ever.
Yep, no Christmas, no birthdays, no makeup, no sports, no games.
No plays, just no fun.
And it was also illegal to go to church on Christmas Day.
And illegal to eat a mince pie on Christmas Day.
Yes.
Yep.
That one's still in place.
No, apparently it's been repealed fairly recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it is illegal to carry an ice cream in your back pocket in Florida.
It's also illegal to eat an orange in the bath in Florida.
Yeah. Strange Florida.
Has Disney loads, so I'm happy.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's, I mean, if you want to know what the Puritans were like, look no further than Oliver Cromwell.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 names we've said now that are just like, oh. There's no need to mention the third one. Right, okay, so, yeah, Puritans, no fun, and they kind of took it over there. So if you think, like, Church of England, I don't want to use the word extremists, but an extreme version of the Church of England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, King Charles I was hostile to this viewpoint because, it's hardcore. Yeah. And Anglican Church officials tried to repress these dissenting views during the 1620s and 1630s. Some Puritans and other religious minorities had sought refuge in the Netherlands, but ultimately many made a major migration to colonial America to establish their own society.
Yeah, basically they thought the Netherlands was going to be their haven, but the Netherlands weren't harsh enough for them either.
So they thought, let's go to this place where we don't know, we'll just make that our own.
Yeah, let's start again. These immigrants, who were mostly constituted of families, established several of the earliest colonies in New England, of which the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the largest and most economically important. They intended to build a society based on their religious beliefs. Colonial leaders were elected by the freemen of the colony, those individuals who had had their religious experiences formally examined and had been admitted to one of the colony's Puritan congregations.
Yep, and in the early 1640s, England erupted in civil war. The Puritan-dominated parliamentarians emerged victorious, and the crown was supplanted by the Protectorate of Oliver Cromwell in 1653. However, its failure to lead to restoration of the old order under Charles II. Immigration to New England slowed at this point significantly, and in Massachusetts a successful merchant class began to develop that was less religiously motivated than the colony's earlier settlers.
I mean, you've got all these Puritan colonies, and they wanted to be Puritan, and then you had the Puritan, 11 years in England. Do you think it was then a bit of a kick in the teeth to later have, Charlestown and Jamestown named after the kings that were then restored? One thing we also think about, so if I would say to you, think of a witch, what do you think of?
Just what a witch? What
yeah, just general witch.
Ugly.
Yep.
Big nose.
Yep.
Warts. Fly on broomsticks. Hex people. Make bad things happen. Run around naked around a tree and go, ah! I wave my arms in the air, you can't see.
I think the audio was enough to give a good visual there. Okay, so gender.
Female.
Let's talk about. Oh yeah, sure. The cats are available.
No, but that's what.
Yeah, other familiars are available.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a stereotypical one. So you stereotypically think witch woman.
Yes.
So let's talk about the gender context then.
Yes. An overwhelmingly majority of people that were accused and convicted of witchcraft were women.
Shocker.
Yep, and this equated to about 78%. Overall, the Puritan belief and the prevailing New England culture was that women were inherently sinful and more susceptible to damnation than men were. No comment.
I mean, we're not the gender, or gender assignment, I should say, over which there is debate about the upstairs and downstairs brain. Just saying. Throughout their daily lives, Puritans, especially Puritan women, actively attempted to thwart attempts by the devil to overtake them and their souls. No. Daily struggle. Indeed, Puritans held the belief that men and women were equal in the eyes of God, but not in the eyes of the devil. Women's souls were seen as unprotected in their weak and vulnerable bodies. And obviously women were responsible for the original sin, with Eve tempting Adam with the apple. That may also have been a pomegranate, but let's not go there because apples weren't there around at the time. Yeah.
Yep, and several factors may have explained why women were more likely to admit guilt of witchcraft than men.
I mean, the torture would have been a good one.
Yeah. Yep.
Arguments with neighbours often incited witchcraft allegations.
Like we said.
Yep. One example of this is Abigail Faulkner, who was accused in 1692. Faulkner admitted she was angry at what folks said, and the devil may have temporarily overtaken her, causing harm to her neighbours. Women who didn't conform to the norms of Puritan society were more likely to be the target of an accusation, especially those who were married or did not have children. So basically those that didn't fit inside their box.
Yeah.
Or if, you had an outburst of emotion or something that you thought was not in keeping with what you were supposed to do, it was easier to blame it on the devil rather than your own emotion in that moment, or to blame it on the devil rather than being a little bit odd or mental illness or being a bit of a loner. It was just easier to have this big bad boogeyman to blame it on.
Yes.
Boogeyman, bogeyman. However you say it.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was just easier. And it was, a lot of the time, women were the scapegoats. And witchcraft was the reason. How did they know about witchcraft over there? How did they know that witchcraft was a thing?
Well, how do you get news out nowadays?
You publicise it.
Exactly, and that's exactly what they did. Cotton Mather, who we spoke about before, he was a minister of Boston's New Church. He was a prolific publisher of pamphlets, because that was a big thing back then.
Try saying that 5 times, John.
I know.
Prolific publisher of pamphlets. Prolific publisher of pamphlet. No.
No, that sober is difficult.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
yeah, so he was including some about his belief in witchcraft. So he was making these pamphlets. They get handed out everywhere to those who could read, and he included his beliefs on witchcraft. In his book, entitled Memorable... I just need to put my teeth back in. Carrie.
Memorable providences relating to witchcraft and possessions.
Thank you. She did. That was in 1689. Mather describes his ocular observations, from what he saw,
yeah,
and how stupendous witchcraft had affected the children of Boston Mason John Goodwin.
I mean, was it stupendous witchcraft, or were his children just brats?
They were little assholes, I bet.
Yeah.
Master illustrated how the Goodwin's eldest child had been tempted by the devil and had stolen some linen from washerwoman Goody Glover.
By the way, Goody is used a lot. Goody just basically means Mrs. or like good wife. Good wife Glover. So if we say Goody, it just basically means Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Glover was of Irish Catholic descent and was categorised as a disagreeable old woman and described by her husband, no less, as a witch.
I mean, yeah.
This may have been why she was accused of casting spells on the Goodwin children. After the event, 4 out of the 6 Goodwin children began to have strange fits, or what some people referred to as the disease of astonishment.
Or possibly hereditary epilepsy.
Possibly.
But no, it was Goody Glover, that vicious Catholic witch. I mean, come on, point to me a woman whose husband at some point hasn't called her a witch. Yeah, but in Ben's case, it's true. The manifestations attributed to the disease quickly became associated with witchcraft. Symptoms included neck and back pains, tongues being drawn from their throats, and loud, random outcries.
So basically, someone had a sore neck, stuck their tongue out, and went, "Eh!"
I wish we were videoing this right now just for your reactions. Others, obviously this is horrible because it happened to these children. They were afflicted with this, but also, what?
Yep.
Other symptoms did include having no control over their bodies, such as becoming limber, flapping their arms like birds, which Emmy's now demonstrating, or trying to harm others as well as themselves. These symptoms all fueled the craze and mass hysteria of 1692. So these children became sick, they had fits, they had seizures,
One of them had been naughty and stole some linen, so obviously it was the fault of the woman that the kid stole from. Not the fact that the kid should be in trouble for stealing.
Yeah,
no, she was made to steal because the woman was a witch.
Yeah, the woman used the devil to tempt this child to do this thing so that she could cast a curse on them. I mean, that just seems a really long way of doing things. Why not just cast a curse anyway?
Mm-hmm. Or just admit the kid was a bit of a dickhead.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but I would be tempted to cuss at some kid who stole my pants off the washing line.
Right.
Especially the really, really comfy ones that you wear once a month that you don't want anyone to see.
The granny panties.
Yeah, if someone stole the granny panties or your Spanx, whoo, that kid would get back of, well, they wouldn't get the back of my hand. I do not hit children.
She does not.
No.
It was just a term.
I hit their parents. What?
Anyway, the timeline of Salem. Let's go to Salem now. So you know the religious context.
Save me.
You know the religious context, the political at the time,
gender,
religion, local,
witchcraft being publicised.
Now let's go to Salem.
So you know the what, you know the where, the why, the how. Here's the what.
Yes. So like we said, that was an overview. And both of the towns had quite hardcore bad feelings arising in 17th century USA at the time. So now, the nitty-gritty.
The first instance of people being affected by witchcraft happened to be related to the Reverend Samuel Parris.
What a quink-dink! That, this prominent figure, this guy who's being paid all this money, being given all this lands. My children didn't do anything bad. No. It must have been witchcraft.
Must have been.
It was February 1692. That's the fourth time I've said 19 instead of 16.
It's usually me that does that. It's catching.
February 1692.
I put a curse on you.
And now you're mine.
Sorry, that was so a high five.
Cool.
Oh, right. Okay, so
right.
Serious people died.
In February 1692, Betty Parris, who was 9 at the time, and her cousin, Abigail Williams, who was 11, they were the daughter and the niece of Reverend Samuel Parris. And they began to have fits described as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural diseases to affect. And that was John Hale, who was the minister of nearby town of Beverley. So they spoke to different towns. He was like, this thing is happening to my niece and my daughter. Help.
You get a second opinion, you get outside help.
Mm-hmm. The girls screamed. They threw things about the room. They uttered strange sounds, crawled under furniture, and contorted themselves into really peculiar positions, according to the eyewitness accounts of Reverend Deodat Lawson, who you said about before, who is the former minister of Salem Village.
So they've got the former ministers in, they've got another local minister in, they've got basically outside help to see, this is happening to my kid, my daughter and my niece, like, what is happening here? Mm-hmm. By the way, you may hear me every so often when we say the name Abigail Williams, just go, because she's one of the whole thing about this just annoys me.
Yeah.
It does, it angers me.
This was the catalyst.
Yeah, and
started
just
everything off.
Her name, she's one of the ones that's just like, didn't need to happen. Mm-hmm. But anyway, let's carry on. That's objective here.
The girls complained of being pinched or pricked with pins. A doctor assumed to be William Griggs. He is. We don't know if it was him, but all sources do say that he was the doctor who was with the girls. But no.
Considering how much this was documented, it's like that's a weird admission to make.
Yeah. But everywhere said that when I researched that it's assumed to be William Griggs.
Although, to be fair, like, if he was the only doctor in the vicinity, you would just write the doctor because you would assume that anyone reading it would know that he was the doctor.
Yeah, but he couldn't find any physical evidence of any ailment or issues. Okay. Other young women in the village began to then exhibit similar behaviours. When Lawson preached as a guest in Salem Village Meeting House, he was apparently interrupted several times by the outbursts of the afflicted. And that is inverted commas.
Yeah. Also, sorry if there was a random noise there. My laptop just decided to bleep for no reason.
Yeah, it sounded like it was it was going to die, but it's plugged in. And you can see it's charging.
It just does that occasionally. Usually at an inconvenient moment. Anyway, sorry. Another two girls noted to have been affected were the 12-year-old Anne Putnam Jr., and Elizabeth Hubbard. The first three people accused and arrested for allegedly afflicting those four girls were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, with Tituba being the first.
Yep.
You'll note that Tituba doesn't have a surname, and we will explain why.
Yep. Some historians believe that the accusation by Anne Putnam Jr. suggested that a family feud that may have been a major cause of the witch trials. As we said, Putnams and Porters were the two rival families.
Yeah.
There was a vicious rivalry between those families, and one of which deeply polarised the people of Salem. Citizens would often have heated debates, which escalated into fully fledged fighting based solely on their opinion of this feud. Wow. So it's basically been like, you don't agree with the Putnams, but I don't agree with the Porters. So we're going to fight because they're fighting.
Yeah. It's like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but also the friend of my enemy is my enemy.
Yep.
Yeah. It's all all just got a little bit out of hand, really.
It did a bit.
Before the witch trials even started.
Yep.
Sarah Good was a destitute woman, loner, oddball, outcast, accused of witchcraft because of her reputation.
Probably unmarried.
Probably a little bit outspoken, just basically, pardon my French here, tired of the shit.
Yep.
Yeah. As, you know, as people can be. So her reputation, she was accused of being a witch. At the time of her trial, she was accused of rejecting Puritan ideals of self-control and discipline when she chose to torment and scorn children instead of leading them towards a path of salvation. So instead of saying, you should do this, she was like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. What you're doing is wrong. But what they're saying is she should have been, that is not the way of the Lord. Let us teach you the proper way.
Yep. So
But whoever's been around children, especially toddlers, long enough, knows that sometimes it's a little bit, you know, easier to scold than to teach.
Yeah, a 4-year-old won't get it.
No.
No. Now Sarah Osborne, who was one of the first women accused, she rarely attended church meetings, and she was accused of witchcraft because the Puritans believed that Osborne had her own self-interests in mind following her remarriage to an unindented servant. So she kind of married below her, didn't go to church, so they were like, how dare she think for herself.
Yeah.
The citizens of the town disapproved of her trying to control her son's inheritance from the previous marriage.
There's probably no investigation as to whether or not the son could have handled his own inheritance, whether he, for example, had what we now identify as a learning difficulty which would have prevented him from properly managing money.
Or his age at this time.
Yeah, or if he had like a gambling addiction, for example. There could have been many reasons why she controlled his inheritance, but because she dared to control something that belonged to a man. Which? Yeah. Tituba. Tituba was an enslaved South American Indian woman from the West Indies. She likely became a target because of her ethnic differences from most of the other villagers. She was accused of attracting girls like Abigail Williams and Betty Parris with stories of enchantment from Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches. These tales about sexual encounters with demons, swaying the minds of men, fortune-telling, were said to stimulate the imagination of girls, weak and feeble girls, and made Tituba an obvious target of accusations. So you've got the outspoken, the bold women, the women who are slightly outside of society, the one who dared to marry beneath her. Yeah, they are scapegoats, but you cannot get more scapegoatish than the slave from another country, different skin colour, quite likely, this is just a supposition, probably spoke with an accent, so that would make her stand out.
Different cultures, because she would have a massively different culture, West Indies to colonial America.
And there would be assumptions made about her culture because of the rise of likes of voodoo, hoodoo, that they probably would have supposed of that, and then she could have told them stories. And, you know, you've got young, impressionable girls that probably embellish the stories in the retelling of them. So, yeah, those are your three main scapegoats, with Tituba probably being the one.
So that we're just talking about the 4 girls.
Yeah.
So you've got Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, and then the other 2.
Anne Putnam, and I will remember it in a second. It will come to me. Elizabeth Hubbard. There we go.
Yep, so those 4. And so they're the 4 girls who were afflicted, and the 3 main ones accused of causing the affliction: Sarah Good, Sarah
Osborne,
and Tituba.
Yeah. Just as an FYI, the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of the Witches, was a book that was, like a book/pamphlet that was written and released and was quite prominent in Europe during the witch trials that occurred between like the 15th to 1700s. And it was basically, it showed you how to identify a witch, what witches did, how bad they were, how sinful, and, you know, it was the whole "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is why it was called the Hammer of the Witches. Not a good book.
would quite like to read it, though. A copy of it, just to see exactly what was said. For historical purposes, obviously.
Yeah, just out of interest. I mean, I've got a copy of... Sorry, there's a dog in the room with us, and he's been very quiet so far, but every so often he's making weird little noises.
He is. Apologies if you heard that. He's, like, buried right back under there now.
He's Dudley the sausage dog, aka our familiar for the episode. Go
back to sleep. I'll cover you up. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a copy of King James I, his book Demonology, in which he has really quite intelligent, actually, very well written conversation sort of between two guys, and very much in the theme of Plato and his the cave and everything. And it's basically how to identify a witch, talking about the witch trials in Scotland, how to identify a witch, what witchcraft means, the difference between witchcraft and sorcery and necromancy and everything. That is an interesting read. And I think that actually promoted intelligent discussion and intelligent ways of finding witches rather than just accusing them.
Yes.
Just an FYI. Sorry, slight segue there.
No, it's fine.
So yeah, the four accusers, 3 victims so far, and each of them were a kind of outcast and exhibited many of the character traits typical of the usual suspects for witchcraft accusations. And they were left to defend themselves.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to come forward and defend these women. They had to defend themselves. And in the days when everyone in society was already against you, what were you going to do?
Yeah, they were brought before the local magistrates on the complaint of witchcraft. They were interrogated for several days, starting on March 1st, 1692. The most damning of them was the admission of spectral evidence. That is, claims by the victims that they had seen and been attacked, which was pinched, bitten, contorted, by spectres of the accused, whose forms Satan allegedly had assumed to work his evil. So basically, spectral evidence was a massive thing, because all they had at the time was eyewitness. So the girls would say, I saw someone who looked like Tituba come and made me pinch, bite, contort. And that's what they go on. They'd be like, oh, the girls saw it. It was Satan. Obviously. Duh.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, how could that be proved? How could it be disproved, admittedly, but how could that be proved? But it was admissible. It means it was used in court. Even as the accused testified on the witness stand, the girls and the young women who had accused them would writhe, whimper and babble in the gallery, seemingly providing evidence of the spectre's demonic presence. So if you're trying to stand there giving evidence to exonerate yourself, in defence of yourself, and they're squealing and writhing and everything in the gallery, you're not going to be able to get out what you need to say, and that's going to cause confusion and fear and panic in the people there, and then they're going to be like, obviously she's doing it right now.
Yep, definitely. Those who confessed, or who confessed and named other witches, were spared the court's vengeance. So even when they're trying to defend themselves, they're being told, you know what, confess, give us other names, you'll be alright. You'll be fine. And this owing to the Puritan belief that they would receive their punishment from God. Those who insisted upon their innocence met harsher fates. They become martyrs to their own sense of justice. So if you confess and said, yeah, I'm a witch, the courts will be like, you know what, you can go. God will deal with you. Which we can say that now is not like a big thing. But back then, when most people believed in God,
and they believed in a literal hell.
Yeah.
Literal.
So when they said
hellfire.
God will deal with you, in their heads, that's the worst thing they could possibly say.
Yeah. They are literally, they are going to burn in the fires of hell.
But then also, because you've admitted it, your life wasn't going to be that great.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd be forever an outcast.
Yeah.
But also, if you didn't admit it, they were going to punish you until you did.
You were screwed. Either way.
Yeah.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. Literally.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
There were many in the community who did view the unfolding events as travesties, but they remained mute because they were afraid that they would be punished for raising objections to the proceedings by possibly being accused of witchcraft themselves.
Yep.
That fear makes sense.
Yeah.
That does make sense. It's not
fear
ideal.
Begets fear.
Yeah. But it's like, if you think that at any point, if you speak up, you will be involved in this yourself, it's not going to make you likely to speak up.
No, definitely not.
No.
During the rest of March, others were accused of witchcraft. You had Martha Corey, child Dorothy Good. She was only 4 at the time.
She was granddaughter of Sarah Good, I believe.
Rebecca Nurse in Salem Village, and Rachel Clinton in the nearby Ipswich.
Yeah. Martha Corey had expressed scepticism about the credibility of the girl's accusations and thus drew attention to herself.
So she spoke out.
Yeah, thereby proving don't speak out. The charges against her and Rebecca Nurse deeply troubled the community because Martha Corey was a fully covenanted member of the church in Salem Village, as was Rebecca Nurse in the church in Salem Town. So whilst you had Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, who weren't that enthusiastic about going to church.
They fitted that norm of what a witch should be.
Didn't really go to church, didn't really engage in the communal activities. Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey were very much involved in the church life. They were good, honest, God-fearing, church-going Puritan women.
Yeah, and that added to people thinking if such upstanding people could be witches, that anyone could be a witch. So, and that church membership was then no protection against accusations.
Yeah.
So thus adding to this mass hysteria. Yeah. Because anyone could literally be it. So this townspeople were then getting themselves quite
worked up. Basically, no one was safe from the devil, and in their minds, the devil was literal.
Yeah.
If hell was a literal place, the devil was a literal person. Yeah. I did get it wrong earlier, by the way. Dorothy Good was not the granddaughter of Sarah Good; she was the daughter of her.
Yep.
She was only 4 years old, but she was not exempt from questioning by the magistrates, and her answers were construed as a confession that implicated not just her but also her mother as well.
She was 4 years old.
You say that, but there was a child that was used as a witness and accuser in the Pendle Witch Trials as well.
Crazy.
Yeah, if they can accept spectral evidence, they can accept evidence from a child. I don't think anything is beyond them at this point.
True.
In Ipswich, Rachel Clinton was arrested for witchcraft at the end of March on independent charges, completely unrelated to the afflictions of the girls in Salem Village. So it was nothing to do with them, but she was going to be a witch anyway.
Yeah. And like Tituba, several accused witches confessed and named still others, and the trial soon began to overwhelm the local justice system. In May in 1692, as we stated before, the newly appointed governor of Massachusetts, William Fitz, ordered the establishment of a special court of Oyer and Terminer on witchcraft cases alone, just for Suffolk, Essex and Middlesex counties.
Yeah, so things got so out of hand, they needed a court just to deal with the witchcraft things.
Completely aside from this, do you ever get confused? Because obviously we're talking about New England.
Yeah.
That we have all of these places. Like Suffolk, Essex are close to where we live now.
Yeah.
But we don't mean the English Suffolk, Essex and Middlesex. We mean the New England Suffolk, Essex and Middlesex, if people from England are listening.
And if people from New England are listening, we will pronounce them in the English way that we know. So if you say them slightly different, we're sorry. We're saying them in the way that we know them over here.
Yeah, because we have those places here.
Yeah. In fact, they were named after those places here.
Yes. Yeah. So it's nice and confusing.
Yeah. Presided over by judges including Haythorne, Samuel Sewell and William Staunton, the court handed down its first conviction against one Bridget Bishop on June the 2nd. She was hanged 8 days later on what would become known later as Gallows Hill in Salem Town. On the 19th of July, 5 more convicted persons were hanged, including Rebecca Nurse and Sarah Good, the latter responding to her conviction by saying that she was no more a witch than the judge was a wizard.
That is badass to say.
Probably didn't help her cause though.
But she was gonna be killed anyway.
This is true.
She'd been told she was gonna hang. So it's like having the last I really love people like the last when you think about other last words.
Yeah.
Like what was it? Catherine Howard, her last word was like, I'd rather die a lover of Culpeper than the Queen of Henry VIII or something.
Yeah.
Like last words is really cool.
Yeah.
When they're like know that this shouldn't be happening to them. So you know what? I'm going to get my last word in.
Yeah, it's like, you're not going to take me down with that fight.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough.
But obviously that's an outspoken woman, so she's condemning herself more.
They're basically saying, ha, she deserved this.
Sorry, Daddy, you're taking up all of the bed. You're only a tiny little sausage dog. Can you sit there? Thank you.
Sorry, just readjusting the pooch.
Yeah.
George Burroughs, who had served as a minister in Salem Village from 1680 to 1683, was summoned from his new home in Maine and accused of being the witch's ringleader.
Mm-hmm.
He too was convicted and, along with 4 others, was hanged on August the 19th. Sorry, the dog sneezed and scared us.
No, he didn't. He tried to bite a fly that was just above you, but failed because he didn't move. The fly flew up. He just opened his mouth.
Try harder. Sorry, George Burroughs. As he stood on the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something no witch was thought to be capable of doing. And that did raise doubts about his guilt for some in attendance, though their protests were refuted, most notably by Cotton Mather, who was present at the time. So, they believed that witches couldn't say the Lord's Prayer, that, the name of God would get stuck in their mouth, things like that. But he ain't managed to do it as if to say, ha ha.
That's almost like his big...
Yeah, big middle finger up.
Yeah.
So people were starting to think, hang on a second, are we doing the right thing here? But the likes of Cotton Mather were like, no, this is absolutely 100%, it's a witch, it's a devil's ruse to fool you, don't pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So by this point, four others, so George Burrough, 4 others, 5 people hanged on August 19th. That body count is starting to rack up.
But then on September 22nd, so about 5 weeks later, 8 more people were convicted and hanged. And this included Martha Corey and her husband Giles, who we spoke about earlier. He, upon being accused of witchcraft, refused to enter a plea and had been subjected to, I'm not speaking this French,
Piene forte e dure, which means
sorry, go on.
Sorry, strong and hard punishment.
He was pressed beneath heavy stones for 2 days until he died. So what they would do is they would normally lay you down with like a door or a piece of wood.
And sometimes a stone underneath your back.
Yeah, and they put a heavy stone on him. He still didn't say he was a witch. So they put another one. And another, and another, and another, until he then was either his back broke, he was crushed, or he literally could not breathe.
Yeah, he suffocated to death by crushing.
That one is hardcore.
That was quite a common punishment, and it was a thing to put the stone underneath your back, because your back would break before, your spine would snap before you got crushed.
But you probably wouldn't die.
No, it would take a while.
Christ, that would hurt.
Yeah, it would be, yeah, no, it's just no.
No.
There's no words for it. That is an awful, awful way to die.
So, within the space of 6 weeks, you've got 12 people that have just been hanged.
Yeah.
From the 14th of August to the 22nd of September.
Yeah, and 1 person crushed.
Yep.
Yeah. Looking back, with the perspective provided by modern science and modern understanding, some scholars have speculated that strange behaviour could have resulted from some combination of asthma, encephalitis, Lyme disease, epilepsy, child abuse, delusional psychosis, convulsive ergotism. The last is a disease caused by eating bread or cereal made of rye that has been infected with the fungus ergo, which can elicit vomiting, choking, fits, hallucinations, and the sense of something crawling on one's skin.
Yeah, they called it back then. It was like people died of dancing. That's been jokingly said about.
Plague.
Think about
Think
about horrible histories. There's a skit on it where people say they danced to death, but they weren't dancing. They just they'd eaten this. They had convulsive ergotism.
Yeah.
And they couldn't stop moving. Their bodies flinched.
Check your bread, folks. It's not always penicillin.
Though the respected minister, Cotton Mather, had warned of the dubious value of spectral evidence, so he did, I guess after having a year of lots of people dying...
He made some sensible suggestions.
Yeah, so spectral evidence or testimonies about dreams and visions. Mm-hmm. His concerns went, obviously, largely ignored during the Salem Witch Trials.
Do you know what one of the spectral evidences actually were? And I cannot remember which one it was... of the accused that was accused of doing this, but one of the girls said that she had been visited by the spirit of a pig with this woman's head on. And that was admissible evidence in court.
Wow. Can you imagine? Can you imagine nowadays? He totally killed that person. Why? How do you know? Because that man's head came to my dream with the body of a pigeon.
Yeah.
And it flew at me saying, I killed that person.
Yeah. And you'd be
they'd be like, you know what? Guilty. Guilty.
Like bat-like creatures in the rafters with these women's faces or things like that. And it's just,
Guilty.
No, it's just stupid, isn't it? Basically. Mm-hmm. There's no other word for it, it's stupid.
Yeah. Cotton's father, Increase Mather, he was president of Harvard College at this time, and he later joined his sons, urging that the standards of evidence for witchcraft must be equal to those of any other crime.
Getting a bit of regret there, are we, Cotton Mather? A little bit of a conscience, sir.
Yet Increase concluded that, and I quote, "It would be better that 10 suspected witches may escape than one innocent person be condemned."
Yeah, that's logical.
Yep, so he wanted that the evidence had to be the same standard for witchcraft as, say, murder or theft. There had to be proof. Amid warning public support for the trials, Governor Phipps then dissolved the Court of Ira and Termina in the October of 1663 and mandated, 1692, third time lucky. It was in 1692, and he mandated that its successor disregard spectral evidence.
Good.
Trials did continue, however, with dwindling intensity until early 1693, and by that May 1693, Phipps had pardoned and released all those in prison on witchcraft charges.
In January 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting for the tragedy of the Salem Witch Trials. The court later deemed the trials were unlawful, and the leading justice, Samuel Sewell, publicly apologised for his role in the process. The damage to the community lingered, however, even after the Massachusetts colony passed legislation restoring the good names of those condemned, and in 1711 granted £600 of restitution to their heirs. However, it was not until 1957, more than 250 years later, that Massachusetts formally apologised for the events of 1692.
That's hard.
Yeah.
So many people died, and a year later, it was only a year later, they were like, you know what we did a year ago was unlawful. But still, all those people died.
And all those people, we have the list of their names here.
Okay.
Martha Corey, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Martha Carrier, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Easty, Mary Parker, Ann Puditer, John Willard, Margaret Scott, Alice Parker, Wilmot Red,
and Giles Corey.
Corey.
He was pressed, not hanged.
Yeah.
Which isn't...
Also accused, so basically out of those and the others, the ones that were actually executed were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., Martha Carrier, John Proctor, John Willard, Martha Corey, Giles Corey, Mary Easty, Mary Parker, Alice Parker, Ann Puditer, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, Samuel Warwood Sr. Anne Foster and Sarah Osborne died in prison. Abigail Faulkner Sr., Dorcas Hoare and Elizabeth Proctor, wife of John Proctor, were pardoned. Elizabeth Proctor was only pardoned because she was pregnant. But by the time, that's called pleading your belly, and by the time she had the baby, it was over. But her husband, John Proctor, was hanged.
Whoa. 3 others died in jail as well, I believe. But that was only in a year. So you see why it's quite infamous.
Yeah.
That all happened so quick. So quick.
It did. If you're ever so inclined, there's the actual play, which I would recommend you go and see it, but there was also a film starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder, amongst others, of The Crucible, which takes place within it, and it does show it as the hysteria of girls. It doesn't show it as real witchcraft, but it does show the hysteria from a human point of view, and John Proctor is one of the main characters, and he's one of the reasons behind the accusations. I'm not going to say too much, but he's one of the reasons behind it. It's a very, very interesting story, and it does make me very angry to watch, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that, our lovely listeners, is the Salem Witch Trials. Brief as they were, they definitely had a lasting impact on the town and the history of witches around the globe.
Yeah. I think we kind of, in Europe, we accept that there were witch trials, especially in England. We accept that there were witch trials, we talk about them a little bit, but we don't, they're like a couple of lessons in school. That's it.
The only thing we learnt about was the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
And Matthew Hopkins. Witchfinder General, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably learn about Matthew Hopkins more than I would because he was quite active in the East Anglian area.
Yeah.
I grew up in Birmingham, and yeah, we weren't really taught about
There's
it. Like,
so much history here in East Anglia.
you really do. But yeah, there wasn't much. Like, we had maybe one lesson on the witch trials in total.
Yeah.
That was it, and then we studied the Crucible in English.
Yeah.
And I played Goody Proctor, John Proctor's wife.
Do you, our American listeners, because we have quite a few of you, thank you, do you learn about the Salem Witch Trials? Like, as in, like, history lessons? And are they vast, or is it brief? Or is it not spoken about? Like, I genuinely would wonder.
Yeah. I mean, we'll probably do an episode in the future specifically about Matthew Hopkins and about the English and Scottish witch trials. The Scottish were quite brutal, and some of the European ones as well. So just the witch trials in general. Yeah. But we thought that Salem deserved its own one. The one thing that kind of I don't know how I feel about it though, is that, as I said, we don't talk about it much in this country. We acknowledge it happened. There were statues. There's the occasional little gift shop and tour if you go to like Pendle for the Pendle Witches. But it's kind of this was a bad thing that happened, and we talk about it, but we just kind of, nah. Yeah. But in Salem, from what I've seen on TV shows and things and documentaries, you guys go big about it. There's shops and there's tours.
Yeah, it's one of those
historical... It's almost celebrated.
Yeah, it's one of those historical places that I would love to go in a weird way. Like, also, and I wouldn't love to go here, but I do want to go to Auschwitz. Yeah,
it's one of those things that you should go to learn so it doesn't happen again.
And Salem is like, I also want to go to Chernobyl. Yeah. And there's like historical places
Probably not to Chernobyl.
But you can actually take a tour around the part of the place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I look rather fetching in a hazmat suit.
But yeah, Salem is definitely one of the places I'd like to visit.
I mean, we say so it doesn't happen again, but like, look at your communism in the 50s in America. Mm-hmm. All your witch trials and everything around that, your witch hunts. Not most recent people that scream they've been part of a witch hunt, but haven't. Not mentioning any names. Don't think I need to. But yeah, there's... The hysteria gets people. It's the hysteria that kills people, and not the actual thing itself.
I think people are a lot more open nowadays to, possibly not witchcraft, but to spirituality. And crystals are massive at the moment. People getting crystals, charging crystals, using them for different ways they feel, for their house. It's like, it's being a lot, believing in Mother Nature being a big part of life.
Spiritualism,
yeah. Yeah, that is definitely becoming definitely more tolerated, definitely more celebrated. Obviously, there are still people that think it's hogwash.
Yeah, there's always going to be people that think it's hogwash. I mean, we wouldn't have atheists otherwise. But paganism, particularly Wicca, is one of the fastest growing religions in the UK in recent times. That and Jedi.
I think people just put that on the census to be funny.
Yeah, there's people who actually legitimately believe it though. But all you need is 100 followers to create a religion.
But you say that, Jedi is more just believing that there's a force around you.
Yeah. It's kind of like space Buddhism.
Space Buddhism.
That's really underplaying Buddhism. Buddhism as
I love Buddhism as a religion.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Reincarnation and the wheel and stuff.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have digressed slightly. So, if you like us, and like us, are into the spooky and love watching spooky movies, TV shows, like having that little bit of a scare, that thrill when the violin comes in and you know something's going to happen, you're going to tense.
All the music goes dead and you're like...
Yeah. Sometimes it's worse when the music stops.
Oh yeah, when the music stops you're like, oh my god, I'm going to hide behind this pillow.
Yeah, and you wait for it, and then just as you start to relax, that's when the jump comes. Or the cat that jumps on your back. Yeah. At the right moment. So if you're into things like that, and we have the perfect podcast for you. We have some friends over at the Spooky Movie Project who have something you might be interested in listening to.
Hey Matt, what's your favorite horror movie franchise?
Gotta be the Halloween movies. Hey Tara, who is your favorite horror film villain?
Ooh, the Cenobites from Hellraiser. What's the worst horror sequel?
Not just the worst horror sequel, the worst sequel in film history. Exorcist 2. Now, other side of that, what's the best horror sequel?
Okay, ironically, that is Exorcist 3. What's your favorite horror movie podcast?
Without a doubt, the Scary Movie Project.
You would say that.
Subscribe to the Scary Movie Project wherever you listen to podcasts.
And follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Scary Movie Project.
Welcome back to a Dark Cup of Histortea.
Now, I found the ridiculous death for this because we do kind of like to, when it comes to ridiculous deaths, we like to, one of us to research that without telling the other, so you can get actual reactions.
Yeah.
This I found. We're going to leave Salem, we're leaving witchcraft, and we're leaving basically
America?
what we talk about. Yes.
Yeah.
And we're heading to the court of King Louis XIV in 1671. So, sticking to the same time period.
Yeah.
1600s? So we're probably just going to France.
Yes, so we're going from the New World to the Old World.
Yeah. And the French are known to feel things rather deeply. They're the romantics. They have lots of the notions. They have
Very
their
passionate.
Yes, they're very unique way with words. And they're quite sensitive. This is no more prevalent than in Chef
Francois Vatel.
I practiced saying that and my brain was like, nope.
Your brother was like, Carrie's here, she say it now.
Yep. Francois Vatel. Now, Vatel was born in Paris in 1631 and he died on the 24th of April in 1671.
Okay.
He is wildly, but incorrectly, credited with creating chantilly cream, which is like a sweet vanilla flavoured whipped cream that goes in between a lot of French pastries. Like
Nice.
millefeuille, you know, where you got the puff pastries with the chantilly cream in between.
Yep. Oh, I do not get a body like mine by refusing French pastries.
You're beautiful.
And full of pastry.
But there is no contemporary documentation for this claim, and whipped flavoured cream was known at least 1 century earlier. But I digress.
Yes.
Now, Vatel served in Louis XIV's Superintendent Nicolas Vanquois in the inauguration fete at the Château del Carré.
Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte.
Thank you. This took place on the 17th of August in 1661. So he was a very renowned chef and was in place at the chateau and served for the superintendent Nicolas Francois for at least 10 years before his death.
Yes, so he was well placed, well respected, well liked.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we assume well liked.
Yeah. In April 1671 at the Chateau de Chantilly,
Hence
Yep.
chantilly cream. Right,
Vatel was responsible for an extravagant banquet of 2,000 people hosted in honour of King Louis XIV by the Grand Condé, which is the military general.
Yep.
That's the French word for it. And according to a letter by Madame de Sévigné, I may get that wrong, but that's what I'm going to go with, Vatel was so distraught by the lateness of the seafood delivery and about other mishaps that had, happened throughout this preparation for this 2000 feast, that he committed suicide by running himself through with a sword. And, I guess you can call it irony, his body was discovered when someone came to tell him of the arrival of the seafood. I can't.
I mean, talk about your dramatic reaction and talk about jumping the gun.
He stabbed himself with a sword, so he literally ran himself through. The seafood isn't here. We're going to be 10 minutes late. Death. Sir, the seafood's... Oh. Seafood's here.
And so is the kebab.
And
Sorry.
that incident is thought to be the origin of the phrase, died for want of lobster sauce, meaning to die or be devastated due to a minor disappointment or mishap.
So, things went wrong. I mean, in fairness, he didn't know that the seafood was coming.
Yeah.
However, as a touch dramatic...
He'd had 10 years in place. He was a well-known chef. There was 2,000 people. He probably could have bought himself a little bit of time. Or just waited 10 minutes. But no, he stabbed himself with a sword because he was so distraught that the seafood was late.
I mean, in theory, could he not have just skipped to the next course and come back to the seafood and then just said, well, our king is so quirky and unconventional that he likes to have his rabbit before his fish?
I don't know, but I'm pretty sure, because it doesn't give a date, so I think the seafood was going to be delivered like the day before, especially for 2,000 people. So he literally had an entire day.
He had an entire day to sort something out.
But no, he was like,
it
no,
was...
the seafood, I can't.
But then again, do it. If it's lobster and shellfish,
I
he
can't
probably wanted
do
it
it
fresh that morning. I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain, but she's still being dramatic in the background.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's where the phrase comes from. Basically, to be like, oh my god, you died for the want of lobster sauce. Which basically means stop being so dramatic.
It's like, calm your peep. It doesn't matter. It's an overreaction.
Yep. So while people were literally being hanged for nothing, Vattel was over here killing himself because seafood was late.
I mean, he was passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah, but obviously.
I just... yeah. Well, I hope he didn't do it in the kitchen.
Well, he was found, I think it must have been somewhere like an office, because he was found when someone came to tell him the seafood was here. Which is the bit that I think, that should have been in Alanis Morissette's song.
Yeah, that is ironic.
Yeah, not a fork when you want a spoon, that's just bad luck.
Yeah. Wow. What a wazzock. Sorry.
Oh, so, that's it for this week. We have our normal scheduled Cup of Histortea coming out in 2 weeks' time.
We're going to add a little bit more milk to that one, so it's not so dark. Sorry, I just want a cup of tea now.
Okay.
We know not everybody drinks milk with their tea.
No, it's more that was lame.
Random? Yeah. I expect better. You know what I'm going to do now?
What?
Because I've done that so badly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go and kill myself with a teacup.
Don't die for want of lobster sauce, Carrie.
I'm going to die for want of a good brew.
That is worth it.
Yeah, that's a worthy death, yeah.
Anyway, if you've got any podcast you'd like us to talk about, either historical or to be on our Dark Cup, please get in touch. We have Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, all at A Cup of Histortea, and our email address is acupofhistortea@outlook.com.
And we would love to hear you. We might not always be the quickest at responding, because I deal with emails, and I'm sorry, but we would love to hear from you.
We would. I believe we've got a request coming up in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we do.
From a listener that we have in America.
I'm so excited.
Yep, so look out for that in 2 weeks, and we will speak with you very soon.
Thank you for listening.